Now, taking the initiative of Zoological Society of Assam further, let us today concentrate on one of the more important topics, that is biodiversity hotspots. The first is the comparison between hotspots and cold spots. Say when we compare uh, similar areas of similar latitude and climate to one another, some parts of the world they appear to be richer in species than the others. Similarly, there are other places which are usually or unusually poor in species compared with the most closely comparable environments elsewhere. Fine. So, over the planet Earth, what we find is that there are certain areas which have a richer composition of species, and there are other areas where the species composition is relatively poor. The places which are rich in species are called hotspots, and those which are poor in species are called cold spots. Hotspots, it is a very particular term defined by mayors, and what it says is that hotspots are areas with high concentration of endemic species. Endemic species means species that are found nowhere else on planet Earth and with high habitat loss. So we call an area to be a hotspot if it has got a higher concentration of endemic species, and along with that there is a higher amount of habitat loss which has taken place in that area. The hotspot approach can be applied to any geographical scale and both in terrestrial and marine environments. That is, the concept of hotspot can be applied to any geographical area, whether it is small or whether it is large, and it is applicable to both terrestrial and marine environments, the concept as such. However, the hotspots that we have today, they represent conservation priorities in terrestrial ecosystems, whereas the marine habitats they remain largely unexplored. So let us take it further. Prioritizing biodiversity conservation. Now, this is one of the most critical issues in biodiversity conservation. That is, we in any case cannot preserve or conserve the whole earth. Now, if we have the money, if we have the resources, where should we focus our attention on? Fine. Where is it that the conservation resources should be directed? Which are the issues which should prioritize the conservation of biodiversity? Now, two approaches are generally taken. One is that is either we prioritize species, that is we focus our attention on the species, or we prioritize locations, that is we focus our attention or go after specific locations for conservation of biodiversity. Since certain areas on planet Earth are richer in biodiversity, so definitely the idea would be to focus our attention, our money, our resources on those areas than maybe the other areas, or we may prioritize species. We may go after certain species for their conservation, and as a result of which, maybe the whole ecosystems may be conserved. Now, let us look into each of these approaches. Prioritizing species. First is the threat status. Now, this is one of the more popular, or one can say more more used way of prioritizing species. Say the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, and 9 categories are recognized: not evaluated, data deficient, least concerned, near threatened, then vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and extinct. The vulnerable species which are vulnerable, like the rhinoceros, endangered, like the pygmy hawk, or critically endangered, like Namdafa flying squirrel, now they are in threat. That is, if they are not conserved, there is a likelihood, high likelihood, that they may go extinct in the near future. So this is one approach towards prioritizing species. That is, most of the countries, they go according to the threat status the individuals are facing, and they concentrate their attention on these species first. IUCN Red List of Threatened Species we will take up as a full lecture in one of the coming videos. Next we have is keystone species. Now let us look what is a keystone. Now this is an arc, fine, arc of a building. The central stone at the summit of the arc, which locks the whole thing together. It is said that this portion, the left portion and the right portion, they are locked together because of the keystone. So from there, the concept of keystone species comes. That is, a keystone species is a species which has a disproportionately large effect on its natural environment relative to its abundance. So this one particular stone, it is having a larger effect on the entire arc, fine, irrespective of the size of the stone. The same is that with the keystone species. In other words, what we say is that changes in the population of keystone species will have a large impact on other species. Say if this stone comes down, there is a chance that the whole arc will break off. Fine. So if the keystone species is lost, then there is a chance that a lot many other species will be lost in the ecosystem. Examples of keystone species commonly given are sea otters and African elephants. Next is umbrella species. Umbrella species are what? Species that have either large habitat, needs, or other requirements whose conservation results in many other species being conserved at the ecosystem or landscape level. So, umbrella species, say tiger, it is an umbrella species. It is at the top of the food chain. So if we are to conserve the tiger, then definitely the entire food chain will be conserved. Fine. So species having large habitat or needs or other requirements, and whose conservation, say if you are conserving the grizzly bear, fine, a lot many more species will get conserved along with that particular species. So these are known as umbrella species because these species provide an umbrella for the natural conservation of other species. Common examples are bear, tiger, rhino, elephant. Now the issue is one species may be an umbrella species and a keystone species and may also be threatened species. If you wish to know more about keystone species and umbrella species, we have a full lecture of on these two species in particular given by faculty of Guwahati University in our channel. Next is flagship species. Flagship species is what? It is a species selected to act as an ambassador, icon, or symbol, fine, for a defined habitat, issue, campaign, or environmental cause. Say most of the time, say as we have said that wildlife conservation is a social process, and we need to involve more and more people into the process of wildlife conservation. So basically, say we need to campaign, and when we campaign on behalf of certain species, and these species are then known as flagship species. Say panda, it evokes emotions in us. Say tiger, it looks majestic, or it may be said to be charismatic. Fine. So these are iconic due to their unique appeal. They all have a unique appeal. Example, panda, polar bears, turtles, tigers, rhinoceros, etc. Indicator species. An indicator species is an organism which is an indicator of the health of an ecosystem. Fine. Its presence, absence, or abundance reflects a specific environmental condition. Fine. Say, for example, the spotted owl is an indicator of old growth habitat. That is a habitat which is quite mature, quite old. Spotted owl is going to remain in such a habitat. River otters, they definitely you won't find river otters in polluted river ecosystems. They are indicators of healthy, clean river ecosystems. Fine. So these are the different ways in which we basically prioritize species. That is, we may look into the threat status. We may look whether the species is a keystone or not, or whether it is an umbrella species, or it is a flagship species, or whether or not it is an indicator species. Generally, if we are talking of keystone, umbrella, flagship, all together are sometimes known as focal species. Fine. So now let us look into prioritizing locations. The first definitely is biodiversity hotspots and high biodiversity wilderness areas. These two concepts have been given by Conservation International, and this is what we are going to talk of in details from the next slide onwards. Then we have important bird areas and endemic bird areas. This concept is given by BirdLife International. Now, all this is basically based on the observation that some parts of the world have far more species than others. Some parts of the world have far more species than others, and that is why area-based approaches are widely advocated for species conservation planning. So when we are saying we are prioritizing locations, which are the locations that we prioritize? These are basically the locations which have high concentration of species. So biodiversity hotspots, high biodiversity wilderness areas, important bird areas, endemic bird areas given by BirdLife International, an important bird area or endemic bird area program identifies and aims to conserve areas that are vital to birds and other biodiversity. Then WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, has come up with the concept of global 200 ecoregions. These ecoregions, they include areas of exceptional biodiversity such as high species richness or endemism, or those which are unusual. Fine. So they may either have global 200 ecoregions, they may either be areas of high biodiversity, that is high species richness or endemism, or they may have some unusual composition of species. Then we have the concept of last wild places, fine, which has been given by the National Geographic, the very famous National Geographic Channel, fine, National Geographic Society. Then we also have key biodiversity areas. Now, this idea has been given by IUCN, that is the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, which is also known as the World Conservation Union. Now, IUCN with WCMC, that is World Conservation Monitoring Center, they have come up with the idea of what is known as Alliance for Zero Extinction. Fine, Alliance for Zero Extinction Sites. That is also an idea promulgated by IUCN. Fine. So these are the various area-based approaches given by different organizations, uh, wherein we try to conserve species on the basis of the fact that which areas are more richer than others. So today, basically, we are going to concentrate on biodiversity hotspots. Now, let us look into the development of hotspot concept and its criteria. Now, the hotspot concept was first given by the British ecologist Norman Mears in the year 1988. Very sadly, he passed away in the year 2019 in the month of October. Mears, without quantitative criteria, initially he did not use any quantitative criteria in designating the hotspots, and he concentrated basically on two things, that is high levels of habitat loss and presence of extraordinary number of plant endemism, that is high plant endemicity and high levels of habitat loss. These two things he took together to identify 10 tropical forest areas which he called as hotspots. Subsequently, he did another analysis and added 8 additional hotspots, and that included the Mediterranean type ecosystems. Now, interestingly, the Mayor's hotspot concept was taken up officially by Conservation International or CI, and it is CI that presently looks after the hotspots. So they took it as an institutional blueprint in the year 1989, and afterwards worked with Mayor in a first systematic update of the global hotspots. Fine. So they updated the hotspot concept working along with Mayor. Mayors, Conservation International, and collaborators, there were other people, then worked together towards the first systematic update that we are talking of. And in this, they identified two strict quantitative criteria. The concept that Mayors had given, it was basically qualitative, but the concept when it was adapted by Conservation International, they came up with two strict quantitative criteria, and they were to define as to which area would qualify as a hotspot. So first is a region had to contain at least 1500 vascular plants as endemics. That is more than 0.5% of world's total. So at least 1500 vascular plants must have been present or should have been present as endemics for an area to be qualified as a biodiversity hotspot. In other words, a hotspot is an area which is irreplaceable. We do not find other such areas on planet Earth. It had to have 30% of its original vegetation remaining. That is, around 70% of the habitat, original habitat, must have been destroyed. In other words, that is the area that we are talking of should be threatened. So these two criteria were taken together in order to define the hotspots according to Conservation International. So the concept of, of biodiversity hotspot that was given by Conservation International that led to an extensive global review that led to a extensive global review, and because of the review 7 new areas which were identified as hotspots were added to the already existing list. What was the already existing list? Say initially there were 10 given by mayors, then he himself included 8 Mediterranean type ecosystems, so 10 plus 8, 18. Then came in 7 new hotspots. So the total number of hotspots then became 25. After that, a second systematic update was taken, which redefined several hotspots. Several hotspots were redefined and they added several others. Several others areas were added to the hotspot list so that today, as of 2020, we have 36 biodiversity hotspots recognized throughout the planet Earth. Hotspots and biodiversity. Combined, the 36 hotspots once covered a land area. What we are meaning here is that the vegetation, original vegetation of the hotspots, once covered a land area of 23.7 million square kilometer or 15.9% of the Earth's land surface, just less than the land area of Russia and Australia taken together. Fine. So the 36 hotspots, the vegetation contained, original vegetation of the 36 hotspots initially covered around 15.9% of the Earth's land surface. However, as a result of extreme habitat destruction in the regions for the over past century, what remains of the natural vegetation in these areas is down to just 2.3% of the world's total land area. So the natural vegetation has been destroyed from 23.7 million square kilometer or 15.9% of the Earth's land surface to 3.5 million, 3.4 million square kilometer or 2.3% of the world's land area. And this is just little bit greater than the land area of India. More than 85% of the habitat originally present in the hotspots has been destroyed. This means that what we can surely understand is that irreplaceable wealth of biodiversity, fine, has been lost in what is in fact a very small portion of our planet. So irreplaceable wealth of biodiversity has definitely gone off, with more than 85% of the habitat having been destroyed during the past century in the biodiversity hotspots. What is even more critical is the fact that around 2 billion people they live in these fragile areas. Of what remains today. Fine. Of what remains today, the destruction we have already talked of. The hotspots today hold more than 1,52,000 plant species. Even after all the destruction that we are talking of, 85% of the original habitat destroyed, yet the hotspots hold 1,52,000 plant species, which is still over 50% of the world's total as single hotspot endemics. The terrestrial vertebrate count is more or less accurate, and overall 22,939 terrestrial vertebrates, birds, amphibians, mammals, and reptiles, fine, or 77% of the world's total are found in the hotspots. That is, if we combine the birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles throughout the world, then the hotspots they contain 77% of the total terrestrial vertebrates within them. A total of 12,717 vertebrate species, 43%, are found only within the biodiversity hotspots, including 10,600 that are endemic to single hotspots and the remainder confined to multiple hotspots. Right? So 12,717 vertebrate species are found only within the biodiversity hotspots, and interestingly of those 10,600 they are endemic to a single hotspot, where the rest they may be found or they are found in multiple hotspots. Among individual vertebrate classes, the hotspots harbor as endemics. So, what percent of animals is found as endemic to the biodiversity hotspot? 35% of all mammal species, 35% of all bird species, 59% of amphibians, and 46% of reptiles. They are purely endemic to the biodiversity hotspots. Now, if we consider the threatened species, fine, those that are assessed according to the IUCN Red List, we find 60% of the threatened mammals, 63% of the threatened birds, and 79% of threatened amphibians are found exclusively within the hotspots, and threatened are what? Say critically endangered, endangered, or vulnerable. They are together called as what? Threatened. So 60% of threatened mammals, 63% of birds, and 79% of threatened amphibians are found exclusively within the hotspots. So that is an astounding diversity of threatened species concentrated within the hotspots. Diversity of threatened as well as endemic species. Now, let us look into biodiversity hotspots by region. The total, as we have right now said, there are 36 hotspots found throughout the world, and they are defined under different regions. So the African region, it contains 8 number of hotspots. The Asia Pacific region, which is composed of a large land areas as well as islands dotting the Pacific seas. Fine. They contain, Asia Pacific region contains 14 hotspots. Europe and Central Asia, it extends from the Mediterranean basin to the mountains of Central Asia. Now, this area contains 4 biodiversity hotspots. North and Central America has 5 biodiversity hotspots, and South America, from Brazil's Cerrado to the tropical Andes, it has 5 biodiversity hotspots. So the total is 36. What is given is the original extent in square kilometers of these hotspots, and then what is the vegetation remaining today, and the total number of endemic species A little while earlier, we said that the total number of endemic species is more than 1,52,000. So this is the exact count, 1,53,687. So if you wish to look into the total exhaustive list of the biodiversity hotspots, you can find that at www.conservation.org, which is the official website of Conservation International. Now, what we are going to look into is within the hotspots, within the hotspots, what is the amount of vegetation that has been destroyed. So, if we are looking only within the hotspots, then 91% of the original habitat has been destroyed and 9% of the habitat remains. That is as per data which was given on the previous slide. Now, this should not be confused with the earlier data that we had given. That is, this 9% represents 2.3% of the land surface of the entire planet Earth. So this particular pie diagram only relates to the total habitat loss which the biodiversity hotspots has encountered. Now, biodiversity hotspot regions of India, of the 36 globally biodiversity hotspot, India harbors 4 hotspots. That is, the Indian region is a part of 4 hotspots. What are they? The Himalayas, the Indo-Burma, the Western Ghats in Sri Lanka, and the Sundaland. And this has been taken from the India's 4th National Report to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So, 4 biodiversity hotspots the region of India is a part of, and what are they? Himalayas, Indo-Burma, Western Ghats, and Sundaland. So this is some of the attributes of total attributes of the hotspots of which India is a part of. So what is given is the original habitat extent, the total hotspot extent, what is the remaining vegetation, the endemic plant species, threatened birds, threatened mammals, threatened amphibians, how many species have become extinct, what is the total population density, and what is the total area which is under protected area network. Now we are going to look into at least the political divisions of the various hotspots. First is the Himalaya hotspot. So stretching over an arc of 3,000 kilometers from northern Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, and northwestern and northeast states of India, the Himalaya hotspot has been divided into 2 regions. What are the regions? Say the eastern Himalayas. What are the Indian areas which are included in it? West Bengal, Sikkim, Assam, and Arunachal Pradesh. Fine. Then we have Western Himalayas, which covers the Kumaon Garhwal, Northwest Kashmir, and Northern Pakistan. So this is the Himalayan hotspot, which extends for an area of around 3,000 kilometers. Then Indo-Burma hotspot. It begins in eastern Bangladesh and then extends to northeast India, south of the Brahmaputra River. So if you can look at this red mark out here, the Brahmaputra River flows just above it. Fine. So the south of the Brahmaputra River, the region of northeast India, it is included under Indo-Burma hotspot. Fine. Along with it, another region of India which is included are the Andaman Islands of India. Next is the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka hotspot. The Western Ghats of southwest India and the highlands of southwestern Sri Lanka. Fine, southwest India and the highlands of southwest Sri Lanka, separated by 400 kilometers, are strikingly similar in their geology, climate, and evolutionary history. The Western Ghats, known locally as the Sahyadri Hills are formed by the Malabar Plains and the chain of mountains running parallel to India's western coast. So there's a chain of mountains which is running almost parallel to the Indian coast, about 30 to 50 kilometers inland. So they are around inland for 30 to 50 kilometers. They cover an area of 160,000 square kilometers and stretch for 1600 kilometers from the country's southern tip in Gujarat in the north, interrupted only by 30 kilometers of Palghat Cap. So the whole area that they cover is 160,000 square kilometers, and from Gujarat up to the southernmost tip, they run for around 1,600 kilometers, and in the midst there is a 30-kilometer Palghat Gap. Sundaland hotspot. Now politically it covers southern Thailand, small portion, nearly all of Malaysia, Singapore at the tip of Malay Peninsula, all of Brunei Darussalam. Then it has the areas of Borneo, Sumatra, Java, and Bali. Why are we interested? Because the Nicobar Islands are included in the Sundaland hotspot. So the basic issue that we need to understand is, of the 4 biodiversity hotspots that we are talking of, India is a part of these biodiversity hotspots. They are the Himalaya, the Indo-Burma, the Sundaland, and the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. Now, impact of biodiversity hotspot on conservation. That is very important. Now, this has been given in a review paper by Mittermeier et al. And his co-workers in 2011. Scientific impact. The hotspots benchmark paper of Mayers et al. That is after the concept was taken up by Conservation International and Mayers gave a research paper in 2000, has been cited by the ending 2005 in thousands of peer-reviewed articles, becoming the single most cited paper in the ISI Essential Science Indicators category in environment ecology for the decade. So the concept has been accepted by a large community of scientists throughout the globe, and it has become the most cited paper for the decade in which it was published within the category of environment and ecology. More interestingly, Sloan et al. They estimated that hotspots concept they received they received donations or funding for conservation over 1 billion US dollars, fine, from the time that they were promulgated. That is 15 years on these globally important regions, fine. More than 1 billion US dollars have been spent for conservation, fine. Now, threats to biodiversity hotspots. First is habitat destruction. It remains a dominant threat to terrestrial biodiversity, and it is also there in the hotspots, and it is still driving extinctions. The growing impacts of climate change, which is felt worldwide, find they are also being felt within the biodiversity hotspots, and which may drive a large fraction of species to extinction, along with the habitat loss which is operating. And as human populations become more desperate, they further environmental degradation. Exploitation for protein, that is killing of animals, or killing of animals for medicine or pet trade, that also threatens species in all the hotspots. There are other threats as well, but felt severely in particular regions. Introduced predators, they have devastated the island hotspots, where species evolved in the absence of domestic cats and rats and other invasive predators. So, introduced predators in islands Fine. They have devastated the native species out there, which actually evolved in the absence of some predators. Introduced plants, they are having massive impacts on the hydrology and biodiversity in some hotspots. Fine, particularly those having Mediterranean type vegetation. So introduced predators, introduced plants, they are having a devastating effect. Along with that, chytridiomycosis is a fungal disease recognized as a proximate driver of amphibian declines and extinctions worldwide. Now, the threat lies in the fact that 59% of all amphibians are endemics in the biodiversity hotspots. And if this disease spreads out there, which is it is spreading, it may prove to be the most destructive infectious disease in recorded history. Say it may take away a large proportion of the population. High biodiversity wilderness areas. Now, this is interesting. These are least threatened, highly diverse regions of the globe. Least threatened. They are defined on the basis of retaining at least 70% of the original habitat cover. Say, in biodiversity hotspots, 70% of the cover has been lost. Yet we have certain areas over planet Earth where 70% of the original habitat cover remains. They also harbor 1,500 plant species as endemics and interestingly have a human population density of less than 5 people per square kilometer. 5 such high biodiversity wilderness areas have been identified. They are Amazonia, Congo forest, Miombo, Mopani woodlands and savannas, New Guinea, and North American deserts. They hold 28% of world's mammals, 20% of world's amphibians, including 7% of mammals and 11% of amphibians as endemics, and they cover about 7.9% of the world's land surface. Now, what Conservation International is doing, it is concentrating both on the biodiversity hotspots as well as high biodiversity wilderness areas. So this concept or this classification has been given by CI or Conservation International itself. Now, criticism of biodiversity hotspot concept. It is not that the biodiversity hotspot concept are the ultimate foolproof method of conservation. Certain criticisms have been forwarded, and what are they? Say, biodiversity is important in oceans as on land. However, the classification given by mayors, they excluded oceans from the analysis and they concentrated only on the land areas. Cold spots that we talked of earlier, despite being poorer for the number of species, play an important ecological role. By investing exclusively in the hotspots and ignoring cold spots, the risk is to lose large naturally and ecologically important areas that contribute to many ecosystem services. So it is not that we have to concentrate only on the hotspots just because they have got high biodiversity. The cold spots are also regions which provide a lot many ecological services, so they too need to be conserved. So that is what is being forwarded by various scientists. Now, Stork et al., they said that hotspots, within hotspots, role of invertebrates is not considered in decision making, fine, and this should also be included while making decision for 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 delineating of hotspots around the world. Fine. So three basic criticisms. There are many other which have been put forward. I'm just giving here three basic criticism. So that's all for today. If you have liked the lecture, please give your feedback. That is very, very important to us. Fine. and thank you very much.